Hello and welcome to the Storied Way Perspective. My name is Rituparna Ghosh. I am your host, your navigator, and your guide into the world of stories. This is the first episode of a brand new year, 2025, and I'm thrilled to walk into this new year with a promise of bringing you new stories and new perspectives. On this podcast, we bring you perspectives of experts who are shaping the world through storytelling. In the past 10 episodes, we have heard how storytelling is shaping the world of children's literature, communications, performance art, video and branding, women's narratives, visualization of data and data literacy skills, particularly in children, disability rights, mental health, and preservation of Indian languages. Each of our guests are experts in their fields and they have poured their attention, their expertise, and perspective in sharing their work with you and me. We promise to do the same all through 2025. On this first episode of the year, I'm excited to welcome Asif Shakeel, marketing and communication expert and founder of a brand new agency called Kickhead. I love the name and I love the logo. We'll come to that in a bit. But Asif comes with almost 25 years of rich experiencing in developing integrated marketing solutions for diverse business categories such as automobile, consumer electronics, and digital platforms. He and I connected sometime during the pandemic because he was working for a brand called Mother Dairy, and they wanted to do something with audio. And Asif reached out to me and said, "We have thought of a campaign, and I'm thinking of children's stories. Would you like to do it?" We went back and forth, but I think the client backed out because they weren't very convinced about podcast or audio platform as the future to reach consumers. But look at where we are. We are doing a podcast and we're doing it from the comfort of our homes. And that's why I've got Asif here. But I also want to dig into Asif's rich experience in working with agencies such as Group M, Denso, JWT, and Ogilvy. And with his brand new adventure, which is Kickhead, he's focusing on solopreneurs, entrepreneurs, and small business and helping them access and scale up their marketing, communications, and storytelling. So that's why he's here with me because I also work with small entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, helping them navigate and understand how can they tell their business stories better. So I thought, who better than Asif to sort of dig into his experience and bring out some stories which can help me help my clients as well. Hello, Asif. How are you feeling today? Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
I'm super excited and super charged, actually. What a beautiful way to start the day, though it's little probably late, but
We are close to noon, yes, but that's okay. A
yeah,
day is a day.
yeah. But thanks for having me. Thanks for, I mean, we had a short conversation sometime back, and all that initiative that you took and this whole robustness of things that you have assembled. I mean, I'm totally मतलब के लिए उर्दू में वर्ड है ज़ नसीब मतलब how lucky I am to be here.
No, no, the luck is mine. I think we
Yeah,
just people who are doing what we are doing in our work, and it's great that our paths sort of
yeah,
intersected and we explored the possibility of working together. And I think some things happen only when the time is right, which is perfectly
yeah,
fine. And I do hope that we'll get to work together professionally in some time within through your new agency. But let's get started. Let's get started
sure.
on in our discussion. And I talk a lot about storytelling and its role in building a brand's identity. You've worked with some of the big brands, but and you're also right now helping small brands create and craft that identity. Can you just tell us something about the importance of storytelling in crafting a brand's identity?
So before we actually go into the deeper understanding of how it really shapes the brand identity, I think there's a simple construct which I've followed in all my life also. The first and the foremost thing about storytelling is connection, is the emotional connection that it makes, right? And why it is important is because of that you are able to take forward the conversations. So connection, conversation, and that leads to commerce, right? So when I say commerce, that really doesn't mean so. Ages back, if you want to take it back, also where there was no money, where probably the exchange would happen in terms of barter or so. commerce just doesn't mean it has to be about the financial transactions. I mean, if that is in today's world, good. So this is a simple structure that has always been the foundation ground. I mean, at least I believed into, right? And therefore, brands have, I mean, in India, if you look at from a communication lens, it's almost this whole industry is now more than 100-year old. And there's not just one, but there are so many of them. Just to take an example of Amul, for example, I used to always think about this thing that how is that? Because there are so many other competitive brands also who are also available. But what is that which is there in Amul? That whether it is Kashmir or it's in Kanyakumari or it's in East or in West, it kinds of cuts across, right? And when I actually read little more and delved further, what I actually discovered is that if you look at that Utly Butly girl which is there, right, it is actually an archetype on Bal Krishna, which is the part of a mythology, right? It is that the Krishna, which who is that the playful kid, who is the Makhan Chor, who is do all those nutcut and all those stuff, right? And they didn't stop there. If you look at, I mean, that's what the archetype is. And if you look at their communication, which is largely, I'm not talking about, which is like which did do it, and I've been following it since my early days when I was in schools and colleges. There is this hoardings that they have, right? And those hoardings are almost like the it is like जैसे गीता होते हैं ना phrases होते हैं they represent what is happening on a reflection of time actually. They're always contextual, right? Now just think about this thing and see how beautifully um, a brand which is largely it's called also Hindustan, India is called Hindustan, has this mythology and how they have juxtaposed that thing so well. So these, I mean, largely what happens is those are the experiences, the stories that we hear is what communication also pick those things and put it together and kind of make it a part of the culture. I hope I answered what I was trying to tell you.
Oh, yes.
And we will, I think, I mean, in the conversation forward, probably we will talk more about how brand identity. But this is the biggest that I could tell you, and something very, very close to my heart.
No, I have used the Amul story as a branding examples for several years. And it goes back to my experience in working in television because I worked briefly part time, but I worked briefly for a show called Brand Equity. And it was about branding and it was about campaigns which have changed, which have sort of impacted the brands and how they've grown. And Amul being an Amul story is a fantastic story, not just for the enterprise model, but also for the branding exercise and how it's sort of stayed relevant over the years. But this connection with Natkat Gopal or the Bal Krishna or the baby Krishna metaphor never occurred to me, and I don't think I've heard it or read it anywhere else of all my thing. And if you made that connection, that's fantastic because I
Yeah,
like it. Yeah, I think again that's where narratives help us connect in a subconscious level, even if you don't think of it in a conscious level, that oh, it's a direct alliance to, let's say, okay, the Krishna and Krishna's sayings and sayings which are true for all times, and therefore it's contextualized with every event that the Amul holding comes up with. One may not do it, one may not see that connection, direct connection, obviously, but maybe the subconscious level, a story works in
yeah,
very subconscious levels, and maybe that's where it is starting from.
yeah, yeah,
And I think it's a brilliant correlation to what
yeah.
storytelling is and what it does to a brand. But you mentioned something about brand identity. At the end of the day, before you decide what story to tell, your brand, your business, your product, your enterprise will always have an sort of an identity of its own, or you will sort of craft it, and therefore comes the story that you want to stick along with it. And since you are working with you've worked with brands which have a larger appeal, and they have a lot of funds and money to think and what do they want to, whether it's a new car, whether it's a new product that they are taking out, they have the kind of bandwidth to identify the identity. How do you help a small business owner identify what their brand identity is, and therefore what kind of a story should they tell along with it?
The first and the foremost thing where I tell any of the client is staying authentic. When I say authentic, it just doesn't mean that on the label the product has to say, okay, is it a veg, non-veg, or the ingredients. That's not all, right? We're talking about values. We're talking about the founder stories. We're talking about the customer journey at all touch points, right? We need to identify how is that what I exist for, how is that the difference that I'm going to make in the life of my consumer or the customer. That exchange needs to be, I mean, we need to find a pure way for that. And there's always this shortcut approach in today's world where the other successful bit or greener pasture outside is always there to grab, right? I mean, you want वो structure or या वो successful model को मैं copy करूं, but to a certain extent, yes, you can. To a certain extent, you can, but it's not sustainable because it's not your story. Stories are basically, these are the data with soul. If you say to listen to your stories by Dadi, Nani, and all that, they are supposed to be those serious, somebody who really people go to take advice and all. But when they tell story, they become hyenas, they become sharks sometimes, they become Vikram Betal. They're playing all those characters. How did they change? Right? So because it is that simplicity in them which tells that if I have to connect with this audience or my kid, what I need to do is I need to open up. I need to make a fool of myself to a certain extent. And that vulnerability draws. I think, I know it's getting too intense in terms of that, but in the simplicity of it is if to any entrepreneur or client that come to a way, I mean, definitely what we try to tell them is authenticity. That's the first thing. The second, I mean, there can be more, but this is also a very interesting bit of it. Anybody who's starting off, there is always a context or lot many things have been done prior to it, right? So there might be a leader already, well established leader, right? Or somebody who just got, say, funded by and become a unicorn and those stuff. So what it really does for anybody who's starting off as for an entrepreneur, there's so much of barriers, entry barriers which are there, right? Now, while he has a story, while he has a problem solving solution, but it's just that because there is so much to carry forward, and there's an ecosystem that he's taking it forward. For anybody entrepreneur, the entrepreneurial journey is highly sensitive also to a certain extent, and at various point of time it feels like that it might crack in between. So there is, so what you do is you might realize that I'm nobody, or you might say that I'm the underdog. Another thing which I have always, I mean, if you have this self-awareness, what you really can do is, world is full of stories of how the underdog has challenged or have overcome that. So it is just building that belief in them. I mean, that's what I do.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's what you keep doing it with various things that you start at the foundation level. And that's why we intentionally, we are a startup inspired agency, and what we do is that our whole program is designed at more at a foundational level, taking from the scaling of X to 10X kind of a thing. These are the two things that I would say: being authentic, and then the self awareness bit of it. We are all born with uniqueness. The thing, no, the fingertip says it all. None of that it matches with anybody's design. We've been designed intentionally like that. We are unique. All that it does is that we need to just discover that unique story for us.
So, as if a lot of times that I have worked with entrepreneurs, I've had to refuse to work with them, saying that I
Yeah,
cannot help you beyond this.
yeah,
And one of the main reasons is that they don't have an authentic stand in their business. A lot of times, entrepreneurs come to me, even individuals who come and say, I need to tell a story because a story is what attracts people. It's powerful, like you mentioned earlier, the connection, the conversation, and the commerce. And that is something that I want to convert to. I call it the three C's, which is connect, communicate, and
yeah,
convince. You call it connect, conversation, and commerce. It's the same thing. So when I ask them why are you doing what you're doing, why are you so hell bent on, let's say, solving this problem of your customer? Why not something else? Why not that? Why not that? Why not? They have no other reason except maybe sometimes just say that this is what there is a future in, and this is the future. There is a lot of money to be made. I see my competitors or the other clients who are doing the same thing are making a lot of money, and I have figured it out and I want to do the same thing. So there is the why is very simple, which is a shortcut to making money, or that's the path to make money. They don't have that purpose attached. And again, what is life's purpose? Everybody spends their entire life finding that, and they never get it. I also understand a lot of entrepreneurs don't begin with the purpose, so therefore their authentic self is completely
yeah,
not not doesn't align itself with the whole ethos of storytelling, which is to be authentic, right? And since they don't have that, they are tempted to create something. Can we make a story about, can we make our enterprise about something? What can that something be, so that we can tell that to the audience, and then we can pivot our business on those lines. In some cases, I have refused to work with audiences such as those. A lot of times there is an authentic self, but the self is not well
sheltered.
etched out, which is like you mentioned, that they are the underdog. They look at themselves as completely lost, or they see that this is part of my life, and that part of their life is not really shared with the world. For example, I'll give a small example. I had an entrepreneur and a friend. She dealt in medical devices, okay? And her medical devices enterprise was doing reasonably well. And she
Yeah,
was the only woman working in medical devices in the region at that point of time. And through our conversation, why medical devices? Why not anything else? That's how the conversation always goes. And I discovered that she was diagnosed with cancer at a very young age. And so she was in and out of hospitals for a long period of time. And she comes from a family which is privileged, access to money, access to better medical care and facilities. But the hospitals that she was going to were not as well equipped. And she saw people who had to deal with, let's say, the hospital infrastructure were not really able to do as well, whether it's from the consumer or from the hospital point of view. And that was when she first decided that when I get better, I would want to do something on these lines. So this is what she told me as far as her story was concerned. And I said, why aren't you talking about it? She said, because I don't want people to know that I was diagnosed with cancer. And I said, what is
yeah,
wrong with being diagnosed with cancer? And she said, no, then I don't want them to look at me as something that, oh, she is not bankable, because it's a single woman running a business. So that might affect a potential client by saying that, okay, what if she falls ill? We want to go into the long term engagement with her. And I understood that. And though, because we didn't work together as a client and a vendor, those kind of things, as friends, I got her to convince her that you can make it, you can lead
yeah,
with your story, because that shows how deeply rooted your sense of purpose is.
yeah,
And yes, you're right, you have to predict. A part job of an entrepreneur is also to predict what are the reasons of rejection from a customer. So you have to weave that into your storytelling, that how will your business stand. If tomorrow you want to diversify and start another business, that's equally important, right? Tomorrow I want to do something else other than storytelling. My existing clients should not feel that Rituparna's focus has now moved. How will her work continue? So that's something that she will also have to do. So I helped her craft that messaging, and then she did. She carried that forward. So sometimes that brand identity, I feel, is sort of not as well evolved. So from a point of view of a consultant, the Storied Way Perspective is designed and developed by your Storybag Podcasting Network. Podcasting is a fantastic medium that brings listeners to gather around a story. As the podcasting industry grows by leaps and bounds, we at Your Storybag want to help storytellers, businesses, brands, and organizations leverage the power of narrative. We are not an agency. Instead, you can imagine us as a collective or a cohort that incubates and nurtures emerging story based podcasts in the airwaves. If you'd like to collaborate, commission, or create your own story based podcast, reach out to us at podcast@yourstorybag.com. What are the steps that you take to enable an enterprise, an entrepreneur, a small business, or a solopreneur craft this identity? Because their sense of purpose, their sense of authenticity, and what they stand for could be diluted. So, what steps should an entrepreneur take? How do you help an entrepreneur identify that?
Right. So what I have is more of a life stage that he is at, and a lot of reading in terms of or trying to empathize with him in terms of what he has as a resource, what he wants to do, hear his vision, and largely try to understand without any jargon, kind of understand. I mean, though I would say in simplicity that his vision, but instead of that, what he will tell me is in a fractured or a broken way that I want to achieve something like this, like a success parameters model, right? Now, first to and most important thing is like in storytelling, one is that definitely you got to be a good storyteller. So ये तो पूरी दुनिया ही कहती है. दूसरा सबसे अच्छा मतलब the other very important aspect of storytelling is you can be a good storyteller by listening also. You got to listen, and you would be surprised to know this thing that it is also such a powerful tool. Actually, listening is that if you give a good hearing to other person who is kind of very vulnerable, who is somebody who's taking so much of baggage on him, because business, especially, I mean, I don't have a context of any other country, but India, it's difficult. It's not clear a path. That's what I'm taking away is that it's your story, and I'm trying to tell them that okay, you actually want to say it this way, and this is your why, right? And what I always do is that when I try to identify the why, trying to connect it back to the business, where how it's going to unlock the business. For example, one of the gentlemen who came, he was into the business of gold coating, basically. But when we had so many conversations and understanding, I read so much, and when I do, what I identified is gold plating and coating are two different processes. So what I do is basically I apply the method of curiosity, basically, and this is take that others also, and because that's kind of a principle which we follow. So number one is that we go with in terms of curiosity that okay, what is this gold plating, how is it different from jewelry designing? Gold plating is the other one. What's the difference? What are the same things in that? What are the problems here? All that. So that's curiosity. From curiosity, what we start building, the next thing is to identify not the truth but clarity, because truth again might have a subjectiveness to it. You're saying it's black, I mean, being told to it, I mean, and but it might not be. I mean, your truth might be different from my truth while looking at the same thing. The third and the most important thing in the business of entrepreneurship is the grit part of it, the courage. Because what you have to do is there is something consistently you have to do it, and for that you need a stronger a, a stronger meaning in life. You need a stronger purpose Asian, या उसके लिए वो जो courage, because that person who's vulnerable is all fearful, and it's not just because of he lacks confidence in his product, but then there are other stakeholders who are also there. That burden that he carries with him, and all that he requires is that freedom. So I don't know. I mean, this is actually how we look at, and that from with courage, then we kind of move to the fourth C that we. I mean, I'm just putting it down. It's all CCC. The fourth thing comes is the character. When we talk about character, the word that you've been using is identity. Is exactly because trying to build an imprint in the minds of consumer, because at the end of it, a product or a commodity, if it becomes a brand, it leaves uh, I mean, that will happen in the minds of the consumer, and that's where the character building starts happening, and in that character.
The identity for a lot of people is how what we look like.
Yeah,
What's our name, what are the colors, and all of that. I said that comes much later.
yeah,
If you don't know what your enterprise has started out to do and how you are likely to differentiate yourself from others, why just your enterprise? Even if you want to start a new property, like let's say, very recently I've started working with a group of podcasters and storytellers who want to be podcasters. And I told them the same thing, that, your name of your podcast will come much later, but you need to know how are you different from any other podcast that there is, and what are you likely to offer, and what distinguishes you, and what gives you the courage to step up. So we all say the same things, and I'm sort of glad that your process and my process is very similar. But I also realize that as a storytelling consultant, sometimes you have to walk the path along with the entrepreneur to understand the limitations that they have in their life
yeah,
and in their enterprise, because those limitations give them, dictate the way they operate their business. And when we want to sort of correct or sort of help them tell the right story, we have to help them navigate their business path as well. So a lot of times I've said that, okay, now my job is not to suggest this to you, but what if you were to do your work in this way? Would that affect, because right now you don't have a story
yeah,
to tell, but if you were to change it like this, then you would have this story to tell, and that makes it a more authentic and a powerful story. You want to tell this, but you don't have this in your enterprise, so I cannot change your business because you're the
yeah,
entrepreneur. So sometimes we have to work on the enterprise before we also decide which story to tell. You mentioned that one of the common mistakes that a lot of entrepreneurs do as far as their branding or storytelling endeavors are concerned is they go to a designer and say, please make me a logo. What are the other common mistakes that entrepreneurs make when it comes to branding slash
yeah.
storytelling?
So first and foremost, I kind of like almost talked in length about it, with lack of authenticity. That's number one, which is like trying to be somebody else, right? Or what you saw is that I'm into activewear business, so Nike has been the leader. So why don't we just pick up
Copy them.
all the quotes and copy them and create something, right? So anyone would figure it out that you're not Nike and you're not no. So and therefore that whole thing might not travel that much. The second and most important other things that which is overlooking actually the audience need actually. For example, EVs, for example, right? And there are certain brands who still think that because they are well, they put so much of investments in their diesel and petrol that they're still not moving, right? They're not moving that stand, and they still want to milk that thing from there.
Hmm. Hmm.
Or the Kodak famous story, despite being 80% market share, the digital is supposed to take over, and you didn't change, right? So I'm just trying to tell you that how overlooking audience need,
Or
because
the
the
market
signals
trend.
because the signals. Do you think Kodak didn't had the brand reports or the brand studies being done? The world's best were available. So I'm just saying they, and there are others also who were. I mean, it was very obviously there, but then you kind of overlooked it, right? That's the second thing that you might do. Uh, Third is that because performance marketing, which becomes sometimes overpowering, and what you've seen is there are certain people who kind of made a big run out of it. But what you didn't realize is they did much more than the performance marketing. But what you thought is, so what you do is the emotional connection. You miss that part of it, and what you come across as a very transactional or some sort of that. That's the third. The fourth, I can which I keep seeing, and which I keep seeing and keep auditing when I meet a lot of people, is basically inconsistent narrative.
Enterprises which I use as examples. You mentioned them all earlier, but these are all newer enterprises and designed differently. One of them is The Whole Truth, which
Yeah,
is by the guy called Shashank Mehta. I
yeah,
love their storytelling. Again, with a lot of humor, with a lot of tongue in cheek. They make fun of themselves, they make fun of everybody else. They are stuck to their authentic story because the whole truth is part of their brand name and their brand identity and ethos, and they sort of own that narrative. And I love their visual storytelling. I love their packaging. I love their even everything that they will send to you has its story with it. And at the same time, for example, through their campaigns, they are constantly talking about the need for an alternative to all the food and the junk that we eat. And while they are also impacting the consumer, they are also differentiating themselves very subtly, targeting an aware market,
yeah.
a market which is now going to start looking at labels more carefully. It's going to start looking at what am I consuming, and vis-a-vis why am I paying what I'm paying for this, how is it beneficial for me and my body. And I really like how they are sort of using storytelling to push the narrative and change the narrative in the market. Another one which is called Two Brothers Farm. They are two brothers, and
Yeah.
they gave up their MNC jobs to go back to
Yeah.
farming, which was their family job. And again, they do a lot of storytelling. One of the brothers is the face of the brand, and not both of them. And again, for a brand and a business which is built on the tenets of aggregation, because they do aggregate a lot of products which are made by their own farms and other farms. I feel the way they own the story of authenticity and being farm produced, and therefore enabling the farmer community, also impacts their consumers, because then they look at it differently. They're a little more aware. I feel sometimes the many factors that people look at entrepreneurs, that oh, this will not work for me because I'm not camera friendly, this will not work for me because I don't have the time, which is also true. A lot of times solopreneurs, they have already so much to do. Telling stories on behalf of their brand is becomes a very difficult, because it sort of eats into their time, and they don't have another brain sitting and crafting, which is where an agency like yours will help them do that, right? It's your job to help them take off that storytelling onus. And the third thing that also comes a lot is money. That I'm not funded, I don't have the money. Is storytelling a an activity which requires a considerable amount of investment? Time is one, effort is the second, and the third is of course money. And because when it comes to whether doing it myself or hiring an agency to do it, I will still be brought onto that threshold where I'll say, do I have the money to invest in storytelling or not? So can you sort of, with your agency, can you tell us, what is the kind of investment that entrepreneurs, business owners can make, as long as investing in their branding, marketing, and storytelling activities are concerned?
See, uh, I really can't, because in terms of giving you exact numbers, I won't be able to. But in today's creative revolution kind of a situation that we are in, if any entrepreneur or anybody that is saying that I do not, there's lack of resources or funds at my end, and therefore I can't do this, is a blatant excuse, actually. You can, and I mean, there are enough and sufficient talent which is there. It's just that it's in a dispersed state. It might take you a little while. Also, in terms of technology, there's so much of things which have happened now that there is means and method that you can find, right? But the problem is that you are looking at a cred story because that's a investment funded stuff, and who has taken IPL and kind of and, and and I love them rather. I mean, I'm not trying to be sarcastic here about them, but you can't say that's the template I want to follow without saying I don't have the money for that one.
Hmm.
This is where uh, the contradiction or the whole dilemma comes into picture. But like I said, I mean, we the whole purpose of Kickhead is to make entrepreneur journey a delight, basically, rather than why should be there be drudgery and why should be. So what we've done is that we have, because we are a collection of people as a team, and a lot of them have myself. I tried doing something outside communication, like for example, I wanted to open a restaurant, a cloud kitchen stuff, and I worked for it, and I've kind of created a whole digital playbook from beginning. I even have the financial planning, and unfortunately, for whatever reason, I realized that I don't want to pursue it further. But it's ready with me as a business model, not in a very consultative way, but like a plug and play for anybody. And likewise, we have for other things also. So, what we're trying to do here is that anybody who has the capital or an investment or intent ready, we can shorten his journey. There are so many of the clients that I've worked with who initially said, I don't have anything. I said, that's okay, let's start. And they themselves, then over a period of time, as things moved and kind of like shaped, came with lot many resources, and we did more than one. A branding project can can be done as low as 30-40,000 to 2 lakh kind of a bandwidth. That websites today, the template based, though, I mean, definitely I've stopped completely working on it, but they can be done within 50 odd thousand rupees. But then still it's a good start, but at least you can start off there. And it can go as high as there are people who charges in this world also 5 lakh rupees or more. But that's purely because what's the talent and what is the kind of mind you're assembling together for it,
Yeah.
right? Because there's a lot of complexities and there's a lot of other things which go into as simple as a, a button, a UI UX so well designed makes uh, I mean a complete different story for the success of the brand, and that has not come from um, just like somebody has put in there, but with a lot of experience, with a lot of knowledge. So that's a trade-off one has to do. But to begin with, it all begins with that: give yourself a start, be at it, and go slower
Yeah.
rather than that
I
whole
I
story
also
of
recommend
hustle.
this. You cannot ignore your
Yeah,
branding and your storytelling
yeah,
endeavors when it comes to your business. It's not something that you will suddenly invest and you will get a return immediately. It's a long term game, it's consistency. It is about building something with whatever resources you have, whether it's people, skill, money, whatever you have, and the bandwidth that you may have to begin on a certain scale and then see how can you raise it up one step at a time with the right resources and then see how that
Yeah.
builds into your organization. A lot of times I agree with you. They come in and they say, oh my, it should be that, it should be that. And even if you show them the examples, they'll say, oh, they have funding. That's why they have it. I said, oh, they always didn't start like that. They started somewhere else. So how do you get from one stage one to stage X, like you said? Scale it up. That's what they lack in terms of experience and knowledge. Asif, tell me, you've worked with, on behalf of bigger agencies like Ogilvy, Dentsu, JWT, you've worked on behalf of agency with much bigger brands. So whether it is the mindset, the potential to tell bigger stories, to create memorable campaigns, which are award-winning campaigns and things like that, to now working with bootstrapped, let's say, poorer version of, let's say, businesses, entrepreneurs, solopreneurs with narrower vision, perhaps at sometimes, or limited vision, let's call it, and maybe great dreams but limited resources. How has your approach changed? Because they're expecting you to say that, please do us a cred, but do it in this much money. So how have you adapted your approach, your mindset towards working with, let's say, the audience that you're catering to?
But initially, where I came from a small town where I was growing up, and to enter into a world which my family, myself, or nobody understood it. But then there has been quite a journey for me. It took me more than 9 years actually to plan, which is so effortless currently for anybody, which is like English honors can go and join an agency. But for me, 9 years, just think about it. And I had so much of rejections. 2000, that was the Y2K problem, which was there. Everyone was into technology, and I wanted to be in that side. Jobs were not available at that point of time. So 50 odd agencies at that point, they rejected me, and rejected not for any other reason, but there was nothing available at that point of time, or they didn't require somebody like me. So that's one context, and then finally getting a chance, and then having a great run, and that too, all that you have envisioned. You wanted to be with Ogilvy, work with Piyush Pandey. All that happened for me, right? So I'm grateful for that life. I'm absolutely grateful about that, right? And then till 2020, that was the penny dropped. So when things kind of didn't, when people were asked to leave, and it was a national, but a worldwide calamity in such a situation. And then we again have to rise and kind of do something, right? And I did try something outside my profession. It again didn't work out. So I thought it was my destiny to come back to what I've worked for so much for 20 years, and kind of give back to people. And so that's where the starting point was. And what I didn't rely on was my past laurel. I didn't do anything, or show anybody anything about what I did in Ogilvy, JWT, Group Hem, or Mudra, or those. No, I didn't want. Besides that, I'm a pure strategy and a servicing guy. Right? There's nothing to do with creativity. But my starting point of my career was I wanted to be a writer. But it so happened that I got a break here, and I did so well, that I just couldn't stop, right? And I
Hmm.
couldn't change my gear, and I wasn't. I thought, let me enjoy that. Let me enjoy that. It kept on moving. So that's where the calling kind of thing. So what I did in this last 3 years was work on this part of my career, which is developing my creative side of it. I did photo shoot, I did write rap songs, I wrote numerous websites. I don't know how many websites I've written myself. And so what I felt was that I'm at a level zero. इस प्रोसेस में फिर ये लगा कि uh, वाप I mean, should I bring another agency to the world which is not going to contribute that much, rather than that whole thing of what is I'm trying to solve, वहाँ पे किसके लिए वहाँ पे करें. then I thought of what I went through, because the whole family and everything has been about job and all those things, and there's no vision or no horizon on business, basically, and entrepreneurship. So it is something which I realized that I couldn't see anything way forward. So I just thought, it's the same thing for others also. So how is that I can help there? And that's where my whole thing of curiosity and thing, and I just kept working on it and refining it, and just came to this level that, oh yeah, this is something I want to do, and if let's see if I can make a difference in life of entrepreneurs this way. So it's more of that kind of a story.
No, it's a very great, it's a good story. It's your origin story, Asif. And having been in touch with you on and off, I felt that this is, I sort of predicted it. If I can just confess and tell you that I predicted that this is the reason why you decided to step away and start your own
Yeah,
agency. And in many ways, it's very reassuring because many, decades back, particularly in the 70s, 80s, people said that, entrepreneurship is a bad word because it is for
yeah,
people who don't find jobs. It is for people who cannot find employment. And when you have nothing else, you suddenly have to open up something and start selling something. That's how it was seen. But you're rightly there that entrepreneurship as a profession, as a vocation, was never sort of seeded into our psyche when we were growing
yeah.
up in the 80s and the 90s. And it was always about a job. And till life gives you a few kicks, it doesn't really, you don't learn the lessons and you realize that,
Yeah,
okay, no, this is not what I want to serve all my life. I want to
yeah,
sort of create something of my own, which is far more meaningful for people like me and others, which can change my life and also at the
yeah,
same time make it a better world for somebody else.
yeah,
And I think that
yeah,
way I completely resonate with why you started an agency like Kickhead, number one. And number two, the purpose of an entrepreneur could be to enable another entrepreneur make an easier decision or a
yeah,
faster move. And I think that's where we all of us are solving problems, particularly if you're
yeah,
working in the entrepreneur, if you're working for an entrepreneur somewhere, you're trying to solve their problem by
yeah.
learning, by applying what you did yourself or what you wish you had help with. So that's where it comes from. I work a lot with women entrepreneurs,
Yeah.
and particularly women entrepreneurs who come from all shapes and sizes, of course, because their enterprises could be something which they're running from their home, which they would have maybe a manufacturing unit, they would have a team, they would have a distribution channel, and getting them to think of storytelling as another area to focus on always somewhere goes back to their own story as to why did they start an enterprise in the first place. At what point did a livelihood activity become an enterprise? And that itself is that journey. Their origin story also feeds their sense of purpose. And I see that what the work that you're doing is going to impact and shape a lot of people. And I'm very excited to see where you are taking this. A lot of best wishes to you, Asif, and thank you so much for having this conversation.
What I really like was that, and all credit goes to you. I mean, how from the beginning to when we first had that conversations to today, it's been very smooth actually. And but I thoroughly enjoyed, and I like, you are one of the person who, um, I mean, because there's been a lot of time we fell out of the grid, but I follow as a storyteller. I mean, I wouldn't say that you are the only one, but there's so many others, Bapa. But you're doing such incredible job.
uh, Got flustered a little because I sort of rattled him about the light and all of that. And then somewhere in the middle, I sort of stopped him about the network. But it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah,
You're also learning how to
yeah,
be on a
definitely.
podcast. And it's
Yeah.
perfectly fine if I'm your second,
And, uh,
let's say,
and
your
funny thing
experiment with
is,
podcast.
yeah, funny thing is, that's exactly what I teach or ask a lot of my clients. Rather, it's a strange thing that I tell them how to do a podcast. When I'm myself here, I have my own
No, it's okay. It's
insecurity.
perfectly fine. No, it's
Uh,
okay. I think we're all humans. And I'm so
yeah,
glad that this podcast allows my guests to be human.
Yeah,
If I'd asked you
that's
about your transition from agencies to having your agency at the start of the podcast, you wouldn't have perhaps answered it like the way you did, with so much of authenticity and vulnerability. And I think coming towards the end also sort of helps you gain that confidence in your own story to be able to share it publicly. So a lot of kudos to you. And I think that's the purpose of doing a podcast like this, but I can have long, slow conversations with guests. I don't think us if we would have spent an hour and a half somewhere sitting and having this conversation over a cup of
yeah,
coffee, which we should have done.
yeah.
But having said that, that the podcast becomes that opportunity for us to talk is a fantastic place to be, and I'm very grateful to you for giving me that time. Thank you once again. Hi, this is Rituparna. Thank you for listening to the Storied Way Perspective. This is a bi monthly podcast where you will meet storytellers, influencers, entrepreneurs, coaches, thought leaders, and experts as I ask them what can stories do in the world today. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, and everywhere else. Look out for the Storied Way Perspective with Rituparna. No matter where you listen to us, please rate, review, and share the podcast. This helps me know you are listening. You can also write to me at podcast@yourstorybag.com. I will wait to hear from you.